It's not going to change with the same people that you hired 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago to push your studio more to this equity and inclusion garbage that clearly nobody out there wants. And we've seen this happen again and again and again. 200, 300 million, even $100 million productions that just lose money hand over fist because everybody looks at it like a cheap virtue signal. Captain Falcon DEI, as we call it. Captain America Brave New World. Oh, but Valiant, it's one of the highest box offices. It doesn't matter. It's still going to go down as one of the worst performing Marvel movies they've ever had, inflation adjusted especially. Renegade Online. The vibe shift hits Hollywood. I love this, and look what's front and center on this article. This is just from about a week ago or so at National Review. Let's not talk about Snow White, the Disney artistic dud. I almost wanted to say the autistic dud, and box office disappointment. The only interesting thing about the movie is the political conceit that gave it shape. The theory that the American cultural inheritance can be ideologically cannibalized indefinitely so that a company like Disney can keep getting rich off its own past while making, quote, equity rather than truth or beauty the measure of all things. I love how this article opens. Guess what? It can't. While Snow White was meeting harsh reviews and audience indifference, my New York Times colleague Ezra Klein was interviewing Democratic pollster David Shore about the 2024 election, and both were marveling at the indicators that young people are moving to the right. Gen Z, quote, becoming or potentially the most conservative generation that we've experienced in maybe 50 to 60 years.
I mean, young men, but yeah. I mean, women are like young women are undeniably 70% and higher going the other direction. We're just bifurcated in a really bad way.
Yes, and that's the point of this article is to highlight this and why Disney is going to be in trouble if this is kind of where they want to keep going. He says it's not just a political fact, it's a commercial one as well. Throughout the first Trump presidency, as the Great Awakening or Awokening rolled over Hollywood, movie big shots could tell themselves that by disappearing potentially problematic tropes and genres, romances in Disney movies, romance generally, traditional male action heroes, broad and potentially offensive comedy, historical dramas with too many white people. They were just pivoting to where the younger generation expected them to be and keeping themselves viable in the age of endless TikTok and YouTube competition. Mm-hmm. But if the younger generation isn't actually defined by its super progressive elements, if Generation Z is recoiling from the woke maximum, if young men especially are never going to show up for woke cinema, then as of 2025, commercial self-interest should be dictating a real pivot. And certainly Hollywood has executed pivots in the past. You only need to contrast 1970s cinema with the movies of the 1980s and 90s to see how a political vibe shift can alter cultural production. So if studio heads have any sense, they'd be studying that not-so-distant past. And we go down here for the Disney Renaissance that began with The Little Mermaid, for instance, in '89, was achieved through the straightforward idea that you can take a traditional fairy tale and adapt them with light touch rather than heavy-handed modernizations. Beauty and the Beast 2 managed to give Belle an extra dose of female energy or agency and use its villain to satirize machismo, but all still within a deeply traditional fairy tale structure. So it just goes on to say there's a big cultural shift, and it's one of the reasons why, I mean, look, and I said this when this movie opened, is that even the girls didn't give a damn about this film. And like I said, my 19, almost 20-year-old daughter, one of the first things she said before I went to go see, she said, I'm not really interested in it, because the romance aspect was very much downplayed. And, she's still kind of a normal teenage girl. They like the cutesy romance stuff. Surprise, surprise. I know, as crazy as that sounds. But this is what's going to have to change. Now, the question is, can Disney, or do they even want to make the change? Or have they convinced themselves? Because Disney is so polluted with woke DEI employees in that place. All they do is look at a company like Disney as easy, cheap financial leverage for their own personal social politics. I don't know how Disney digs themselves out of this, but I mean, this idea that they've canceled Tangled, or at least delayed it, I guess maybe gives some sense that maybe somewhere behind the scenes, Alan Bergman's sitting there going, I'm tired of looking like an idiot every time a movie comes out. And he'll get a couple of wins in there, like a Moana 2, which you almost couldn't screw up, as big as Moana was. And then Mufasa just kind of trailed out because what else was there in the box office between Christmas and February or whatever? Nothing. But I mean, it's not like that was a huge smash hit success, but point is that I think I kind of wonder how, Alan Bergman wakes up every morning and just has to deal with failure after failure after failure in the last 5 years with this company.
Vibe shift. Why I really do find it funny that they're so willing to go away from romance. I still think that was one of the things that people misunderstood about Top Gun, was that it actually did have a romance story. Mm-hmm. It ended up being the outro. I said, when was the last time a movie ended on a love ballad? I can't remember. And there was even criticism of Twisters, which was my favorite movie from last year, that they shot the scene at the end where the couple gets together and then they ended up leaving it on the cutting room floor, which is a problem if I feel like the movie would have been brought home even more succinctly if they would have just included that scene, and maybe just going back to stories about like look, romantic comedies are all going to streaming now, but the few examples that you have of them actually going to theaters do well, like Anyone But You with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney. They were offered a fortune to make that movie for streaming, and they said, no, we want to send it to theaters. It did good numbers. It did good box office, and even the Colleen Hoover slop does well now when it plays for women, but they can't find a way to really bring this home for all audiences because there's too much ideological rot to just let what works work.
And that's a big part of it. And that's what's going to have to change. And the problem is these studios, in order to make those changes, and I think this is why it's going to take so darn long, especially for somebody like Disney, is because you have got to fire a lot of people. Because it's not going to change with the same people that you hired 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago to push your studio, more to this equity and inclusion garbage that clearly nobody out there wants. And we've seen this happen again and again and again. 200, 300 million, even $100 million productions that just lose money hand over fist because everybody looks at it like a cheap virtue signal. Captain Falcon DEI, as we call it. Captain America Brave New World. Exactly. Oh, but Valiant, it's one of the highest box offices. It doesn't matter. It's dragging in people because it's a Marvel thing. It's still going to go down as one of the worst performing Marvel movies they've ever had, inflation adjusted especially. So, I mean, nobody cares. Nobody wanted to see it. But Disney's going to have to, they're going to have to get rid of a lot of people. You have these political ideologues that work in the creative side of companies like Disney, and they're running the creative side. You can't just tell them, stop being political ideologues with everything you do. You've got to fire these people. And that's the question is, do they actually want to do that? I don't think they do. Because Bob Iger agrees with most of it anyway. So,
I mean, writing is also very, very different now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Like most of the writers today, I would argue, if they went to film school, they didn't grow up reading, they grew up watching. So they write screenplays. They don't really necessarily understand good writing as a whole, which is why stuff from 30 years ago feels so much more full when it's adapted. And I don't know. I don't see this being fixed anytime soon, at least not without major ramifications financially beforehand.
Well, that's what I'm looking at, right? I mean, that's what would seem to make the most sense. The question is, do they have the gumption to do it? And I just don't think most of them, at least.
I mean, like they can't get out of their own way. I mean, these are the same people. They're still going to be fighting over whether we know what to put on streaming, what to put in theaters. We're talking about the process of putting the great movies out in theaters, and they can't get out of their own way to figure out what needs to go on streaming, what needs to go in theaters, theatrical windows, all things that they took for granted 20 or 30 years ago as just part of the industry. Now just all combined to cause endless problems. And no wonder things can't launch right off the bat. Talk about the Marvel movies that have worked in the last 5 years and their mainstream characters, whether it's Spider-Man, Deadpool, Wolverine. Thunderbolts isn't going to do those numbers. Alternate Captain America isn't going to do those numbers. It's going to do Eternals numbers, and this is going to keep happening.
With the pipeline taking as long as it does to take a movie from concept to pre-production writing, getting into principal photography, getting it into theaters, it's a multi-year process, which, I'm going to ask everybody this question before I forget again. Speaking of, how many posts do we see right now? Oh, Avengers, Doomsday, who cares? Yeah, starting filming in the next few days.
Yeah.
This movie right now they're still telling us that this movie is going to come out
next
in
year,
May of next year.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
How? There's no way. You're telling me with all that cast, it's going to take you at least 3 to 4 months of principal photography, and that's if you get everything right the first time.
I think Dr. Doom is going to put tariffs on the whole world, and that's what's going to happen.
That would probably not surprise them. They're probably rewriting that whole script.
Magical tariffs. That's what it will be.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.